"Mr. McCarthy, you've gone too far." The words cut through the chamber like a blade. The room froze. Eyes darted from one side of the aisle to the other, every face reflecting the same mix of disbelief and anticipation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the air thick with tension, as though the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would happen next. Kevin McCarthy leaned forward, his lips curled in the smug half-smile that so many had seen before. His voice carried across the chamber, laced with arrogance. "Too far? The only thing that's gone too far is your desperate attempt to make yourself relevant." The words dripped with mockery, and a ripple of whispers spread like fire through the room. Some gasped. Others smirked. A few shook their heads. Cameras clicked, microphones buzzed. This wasn't just another debate. It was war. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat with her back straight, her hands resting calmly on the desk in front of her. Her eyes locked on McCarthy's with a steadiness that unnerved even those who supported him. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to match his anger. Her silence was louder than his insult. McCarthy pressed on, emboldened by the sound of his own words. "You come here with speeches, with theatrics, pretending to represent the people when in truth, you represent nothing but your own ambition." He smacked his hand against the podium, his voice rising, feeding off the echoes in the chamber. And frankly, it's embarrassing. The chamber stirred again. Murmurs, gasps. Phones lit up as aides typed frantically, already sending the quotes out into the world. McCarthy thought he had cornered her. He thought he had delivered the knockout line. But Jasmine's composure told a different story. She leaned back slightly, one eyebrow raised, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't spoken yet, but her body language told the truth. She was waiting for the exact moment that would flip the room on its head. The silence around her became electric. Even McCarthy, for all his bluster, seemed unsettled by her calm. And then, with one slow motion, she reached for the single document that would change everything. The scene did not erupt out of thin air. Hours before McCarthy's words echoed across the chamber, the atmosphere was already tense, already charged with the weight of something bigger than politics. The session had been called to address questions of leadership, accountability, and the direction of a country fractured along bitter lines. It was not supposed to be a battlefield, but everyone in that room felt the undercurrent of war. At the center stood Kevin McCarthy, the once powerful speaker who had built his career on alliances and threats. To his supporters, he was the strong hand they believed Washington needed. To his critics, he was the embodiment of corruption and hypocrisy, a man who spoke of unity while deepening divides. His presence that day was not just another politician filling time. It was the shadow of a system fighting to preserve itself. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. Younger, sharper, with a fire forged by experience, she represented more than her own voice. For many, she carried the weight of communities often ignored, of immigrants and working families who had too often been told to wait their turn. Her presence was a reminder that America's future wasn't written in backroom deals. It was written in the courage to confront arrogance head-on. The debate had begun like so many others, with talking points and rehearsed jabs, but the tone shifted quickly. McCarthy saw an opening, and instead of addressing policy, he aimed his fire at Crockett herself. It wasn't about facts. It was about belittling, about breaking down the dignity of someone he never believed belonged in the same arena as him. And that is why the chamber grew silent when Jasmine didn't answer. Because silence in that moment was not weakness, it was strategy. She wasn't just holding back words. She was holding the weight of something far more powerful. This wasn't about a single insult or even a single argument. It was about the story of America itself, a story of who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who gets silenced. Every whisper in that chamber, every camera lens pointed at Crockett, captured a drama that went far beyond two figures. For the millions who would soon see the clip replayed on phones and televisions, it would become a moment of truth. Dignity versus arrogance, courage versus entitlement. It was the kind of clash that defines not just careers, but generations. And yet, as the audience leaned in, no one, not even McCarthy, understood what was about to happen. They thought this was just another heated exchange. They thought it would end with a headline, maybe a soundbite. They had no idea it would become history, because hidden in Crockett's calm was preparation. Hidden in her silence was a plan, and inside her folder sat the one document that would transform a shouting match into a defining moment. But no one in that room could have predicted what Crockett had prepared. No one could have known that her quiet patience was not submission, but a countdown. What happens next will not just be remembered, it will be replayed for years to come. It will be studied as the night arrogance met its match and dignity spoke louder than any insult. The nation was about to witness a turning point. And McCarthy, for all his confidence, was walking straight into it. Kevin McCarthy did not stumble into power. He climbed, hand over hand, deal after deal, never pausing long enough to consider the ground beneath him. From his earliest days in California politics, McCarthy learned the art of survival not by conviction, but by calculation. He wasn't known for fiery ideals or bold visions. He was known for backroom promises, for shaping his words to fit the audience in front of him, for telling each ally what they most wanted to hear. That skill, slippery as it was, carried him into the halls of Congress. He quickly became a figure who knew everyone, who had a hand in every conversation. Yet beneath the smiles and the handshakes was something emptier. A hollow center built not on principle but on ambition. His rise was never about serving. It was about winning. And to win, McCarthy would bend to whoever held the loudest voice in the room. The fragility of that path showed itself again and again. When he finally reached the speakership, it was not through strength but through compromise upon compromise. He promised one thing to moderates, another to hardliners, and another still to those who demanded loyalty above all else. By the time he secured the gavel, he had already given away so much power that the title meant little. He was a speaker, yes, but one bound by invisible chains to the very people he thought he controlled. And yet he carried himself with swagger. On the surface, McCarthy projected the confidence of a man untouchable. He walked into chambers with his chin high, his voice sharp, his tone dismissive. He believed in the performance of power, in the image of strength even when the reality underneath was crumbling. It was this act, this cultivated arrogance that often deceived his allies and infuriated his opponents. Patterns began to emerge. When challenged by colleagues, McCarthy rarely debated on ideas. He belittled, he mocked. He turned opponents into caricatures, reducing their arguments to punchlines rather than meeting them with substance. It was easier to humiliate than to reason. It was easier to sneer than to build, and people noticed. Again and again, he underestimated those who didn't look like him, who didn't come from the same networks of privilege and power. He mistook dignity for weakness, patience for naivety. To McCarthy, silence was always a sign of defeat. He never once considered that silence could be a weapon waiting to strike. The contradictions in his career became glaring. He spoke of unity while fueling division. He promised responsibility while bowing to chaos. He talked of leadership, yet his tenure was marked by fragility so great that a whisper of rebellion was enough to shake him. For all his boasts, McCarthy never stood firmly on his own. He was always leaning on the shifting winds of others. Those insecurities bled through in private moments. Colleagues described him as eager to please, desperate to hold on to friendships and terrified of being left out of the inner circle. He wanted power, but he also wanted to be liked, a dangerous combination that made him bend to pressure again and again. What appeared as confidence on the outside was often the mask of a man unsure of his footing. And still, he survived. Through every scandal, every challenge, every betrayal, he found a way to stay afloat. But survival built on hollow posturing is not strength, it is delay. Each escape, each narrow win only fed his arrogance. Each time he dodged accountability, he grew bolder, more dismissive, more certain that he could never be touched. That arrogance was on full display the day he turned his fire on Jasmine Crockett. To him, she was just another target, another chance to flex the swagger that had carried him this far. He saw her calm as submission, her silence as weakness, her presence as nothing more than an opportunity to remind the chamber who held the louder voice. But what McCarthy didn't see, what he could never imagine, was that Crockett was not like the opponents he had toyed with before. She was not there to trade insults or bow to the weight of his title. She was there with something stronger. And so, with his own history of arrogance pushing him forward, McCarthy leaned into the very flaw that had always defined him. He dismissed, he mocked, he underestimated. But the very arrogance that fueled his career would soon lead to his downfall. Long before she sat in that chamber, Jasmine Crockett had walked a road filled with struggle, sacrifice, and grit. Her story was not polished by privilege nor paved with shortcuts. It was carved step by step out of obstacles that might have broken someone else. But for Jasmine, every challenge became fuel. Every door slammed in her face became another reason to push forward. She was born in a working-class home where nothing came easy and where survival depended on determination. From an early age, Jasmine saw the sharp edges of inequality. She saw neighbors silenced because of where they came from, families treated as invisible because they didn't fit the mold of power. These early lessons did not make her bitter. They made her fierce. She learned to stand tall in rooms where she was told she did not belong, to speak even when others tried to talk over her. Education became her weapon. She fought for it, often balancing more than one job while studying. While others coasted through doors opened by connections, Jasmine had to build her own. She worked late nights, studied longer hours, and refused to let the weight of expectation crush her spirit. It was not just about personal success. It was about proving that the voices left out of America's story deserved to be heard. Her career began in law, where she fought for those who had no one else to defend them. In crowded courtrooms and underfunded offices, she stood beside people who were overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside. She didn't choose easy cases. She chose the ones that mattered. When landlords tried to evict struggling families, Jasmine fought back. When the justice system threatened to swallow the powerless, she became their shield. Her opponents often tried to discredit her, to paint her as inexperienced or emotional. But time after time, Jasmine showed that dignity under fire was more powerful than arrogance. She understood that mockery was a mask for fear, that dismissal was the tactic of those who had no argument left. Instead of snapping back with anger, she sharpened her resolve. She let her work speak for itself, and it spoke volumes. Her path into politics came not from ambition but from necessity. She watched as leaders ignored communities she knew by name, as decisions were made without considering the people most affected. She realized that defending dignity in court was not enough. The fight had to move into the halls of power themselves. So she ran, not because she thought it would be easy, but because she knew it would be hard. The campaign trail was brutal. Critics laughed, opponents sneered. Some told her outright that she would never make it, that her background, her voice, her very presence did not fit the picture of what a leader should look like. But those words didn't stop her. They ignited her. Every insult became a challenge. Every doubt became a reason to prove them wrong. And with every step, she drew closer to victory. When Jasmine finally won, it wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for every person who had been told they didn't belong. It was proof that dignity could rise above mockery, that resilience could topple arrogance. Her story became a rallying point, not just for her district, but for anyone who still believed in the promise of America as a place where grit could triumph over privilege. In office, she never forgot where she came from. She carried the voices of her community into every debate, every hearing, every vote. And when faced with hostility, she didn't waver. She knew that the same forces that had tried to silence her all her life would follow her into politics. But she also knew that she had been forged for this fight. There were moments when she was mocked on the record, when colleagues rolled their eyes, when opponents tried to bait her into losing her composure. Yet Jasmine's strength was never in matching their noise. It was in holding her ground with calm, in reminding everyone that true power is not in shouting but in standing firm. That was the woman who sat across from Kevin McCarthy that night. Not a novice, not someone easily rattled, but someone who had faced worse than his arrogance and come out stronger every time. Every scar in her story was a source of strength. Every dismissal she had endured became armor. Her stillness in that chamber wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Jasmine knew that the moment was bigger than herself, bigger than her career. She knew that every eye in that room, and soon every eye in the country, would be watching, not just what she said, but how she said it. And so she sat, calm and collected, waiting for the perfect second to strike. Because she wasn't just defending herself, she was defending the principle that no one, no matter how powerful, had the right to strip others of their dignity. Little did McCarthy know. He wasn't facing just another politician. He was facing a storm wrapped in calm. The chamber was alive with a strange kind of energy. The quiet before a storm, the static charge of anticipation. At the center of it all, Two figures stood locked in a duel that was no less brutal for being waged with words instead of swords. Kevin McCarthy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the practiced smirk etched onto his face. It wasn't confidence, not really, but the performance of confidence. He had spent his career relying on that smirk, that dismissive air to shrink opponents before the real blows even landed, and now he sharpened it into a blade aimed squarely at Jasmine Crockett. "Congresswoman," he began, letting the syllables drip with mock courtesy. "Perhaps if you spent less time on theatrics and more time on understanding the facts, we wouldn't be wasting everyone's time." The insult landed with a dull thud, but it was never about content. It was about tone. He leaned on the same tactics he always had. Ridicule, belittling, the sneer that said, "You don't belong here." Crockett did not flinch. Her eyes lifted from the page in front of her, calm, steady, unhurried. She didn't rise to match his tone. She didn't roll her eyes or scowl. Instead, she simply blinked once, slowly, like someone measuring the temperature of the room. McCarthy pushed again. Louder this time. "You see, Madam Chair, some of us came here to govern. Others came here to perform." He spread his hands as though presenting Crockett as Exhibit A. "Theatrics," he repeated, leaning into the word, savoring it. A murmur spread across the room. A few of his allies chuckled, but others shifted in their seats, discomfort flickering in their expressions. This wasn't new. They had seen this routine before. It was the McCarthy brand, dominance through mockery. But there was something different today, something uneasy in the air. Crockett, still composed, leaned forward ever so slightly. She set her elbows on the table, fingers interlaced, eyes never leaving McCarthy's face. She didn't speak. Not yet. The silence worked against him. He mistook it for weakness, the way a gambler mistakes a calm opponent for one without cards to play, and so he doubled down. "You know, I'll give you this," he said with a smirk. "You've got passion. But passion without discipline? That's just noise. And Washington's had enough noise, don't you think?" He chuckled at his own line. A few allies echoed him, but the sound died quickly, swallowed by the tension in the chamber. Crockett's gaze flicked downward, then back up. She still said nothing. McCarthy, emboldened by what he thought was silence in retreat, leaned forward now, voice rising. "Frankly, I don't know why we keep indulging this kind of—" He paused, deliberately searching for the word, letting the pause itself sting. "Nonsense. The American people deserve seriousness, not sideshows." The word sideshows lingered, ugly, dismissive. It was meant to brand her, to pin her down under his thumb. But this time the room shifted. Lawmakers who had been scribbling notes stopped writing. Journalists lifted their heads. Cameras zoomed in. Even some of McCarthy's closest allies glanced uneasily at one another. There was a sense, unspoken but undeniable. He was pushing too far. Still, Crockett sat there unshaken. Her calmness wasn't retreat. It was a blade being sharpened in silence. She adjusted the papers in front of her, slow, deliberate. The soft rasp of paper against the wood table cut through the chamber like a drumbeat. McCarthy smirked again, but for the first time, it faltered. Just slightly. He sensed something shifting, though he couldn't quite name it. And then came the whispering. Not loud, but enough to ripple through the room. Lawmakers leaned toward one another, murmuring questions. "What is she doing? What does she have?" The press corps, restless moments ago, leaned forward in unison, eyes glued to her hands. The tension was unbearable. Crockett reached forward and pulled the sheet of paper closer. Slowly, purposefully, the chamber stilled. Even McCarthy paused, his smirk hanging awkwardly, as though caught halfway between triumph and doubt. It was in that silence, with the nation watching, with allies and opponents alike holding their breath, that Jasmine Crockett prepared to deliver the line that would define the day. And then, with the nation watching, she pulled the paper closer. The chamber had gone unnaturally still, the kind of silence that feels like it carries weight. Every eye followed Jasmine Crockett's hand as it hovered over the document in front of her. The air seemed to thicken. McCarthy's smirk still lingered, but it looked less like confidence now and more like a mask beginning to crack. Crockett didn't rush. She straightened her papers with precision, letting the sound of each shuffle echo in the hushed room. She looked up, caught McCarthy's eye, and then looked back down as though she had already decided his fate. And then, She began. "Mr. McCarthy," she said softly, her voice steady, deliberate. No raised tone, no theatrical outburst, just calm authority. "You've suggested that my contributions here amount to noise, that ideal in sideshows." A faint chuckle from McCarthy. Forced, defensive. Crockett slid the sheet of paper forward into view. Cameras zoomed in, the press corps whispering frantically to one another. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't waver. "But what the American people deserve," she continued, pausing just long enough for the silence to build, "is truth. And truth, Mr. McCarthy, is not a sideshow." The first ripple ran through the chamber. Some heads tilted. Others leaned forward, sensing something coming. Crockett lifted the page with both hands, holding it up high enough for the cameras to capture. "This," she said, her voice firm now, "is a record of your votes. Your own record. Every time you've stood here and told the American people one thing and voted another." Gasps, audible now. Lawmakers shifting in their seats, murmuring. McCarthy's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth, but Crockett didn't give him the space. "You accuse me of theatrics," she pressed on, her tone unwavering. "But what's more theatrical than promising accountability while cutting backroom deals? What's more theatrical than swearing loyalty to principles you abandon the moment power is dangled in front of you?" The chamber rumbled. Reporters scribbled furiously, typing into phones, whispering, "She's got receipts." Crockett set the paper down on the table with a deliberate slap. "Here in black and white. The contradiction between your words and your actions. The hypocrisy you've hidden behind smirks and sound bites." The noise grew. Whispers, gasps, even the faintest chuckles from those who relished the spectacle. Social media lit up instantly. Screens across the nation flashed with hashtags. Crockett slays receipts visa rhetoric. McCarthy exposed tweets flew in real time. Jasmine Crockett just ended Kevin McCarthy's career on live TV. She's not yelling. She's not mocking. She's just dismantling him with facts. Crockett slays began trending before she even finished her sentence. Crockett leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in front of her, still calm, still unshaken. "You see, Mr. McCarthy, arrogance can fill a room, but it cannot erase the record." The blow landed harder than any insult. The room shifted palpably. McCarthy leaned forward, face stiff, lips pursed as though ready to fire back. But when he glanced at the paper, his own record laid bare, the words caught in his throat. Crockett pressed again, her voice steady, almost surgical. "You mock passion. You belittle conviction. But what you can't mock is the truth staring back at you from your own votes. And the people watching tonight, they'll see it too." Gasps again. A few lawmakers clapped their hands on the table before catching themselves. Others leaned back wide-eyed, processing what they'd just witnessed. McCarthy tried to interject, mumbling something about context, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs rising around him. He looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. The swagger had drained, leaving behind a man stripped of his armor. Crockett glanced at him once more, her expression serene, almost pitying. "So call it theatrics if you must," she said, each word deliberate. "But if shining a light on hypocrisy is theater, then the American people deserve a front row seat." The chamber erupted. Whispers, stifled laughter, cameras clicking wildly. The press gallery buzzed like a hive. On Twitter, hashtags exploded into trending territory. McCarthy walked into this debate with swagger and left with silence. Crockett didn't just win, she exposed him. That wasn't a debate. That was an autopsy. Through it all, Crockett remained calm. No gloating. No raised fist. Just poise. The dignity of someone who had weathered storms bigger than Kevin McCarthy's smirk. She carefully placed the document back on the table, her hands as steady as they had been at the start. The motion itself felt final, like the closing of a book. The chamber, once tense and uncertain, now seemed to tilt in her favor. Lawmakers who had been skeptical leaned forward with new respect. The press had their headline. The audience watching at home had their moment of catharsis. And Kevin McCarthy? He sat there exposed. His arrogance and the very fuel of his rise had been turned against him. His smirk, once a weapon, now looked like a desperate mask. He shifted in his seat, tugged at his tie, glanced at allies who avoided his gaze. The duel was over. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't matched insult with insult. She had done something far more devastating. She had shown him, and the world, that his power was an illusion. And when she finally leaned back, her calm unbroken, the cliffhanger hung heavy in the air. By the time she placed the document back on the table, McCarthy wasn't just defeated, he was exposed. The clip hit the internet before the chamber had even emptied. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked out into the hallway, her calm dismantling of Kevin McCarthy was already looping across millions of screens. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every platform caught fire. Crockett slays surged to the top of the trends within minutes. Memes sprang up instantly. McCarthy's bewildered expression, frozen beside captions like, "When you realize receipts don't lie." A side-by-side edit of Jasmine sliding the paper forward against a slow-motion clip of a boxer landing a knockout punch pulled hundreds of thousands of views in an hour. The hashtags multiplied. Your receipts via rhetoric. Exposed on live TV in storm and calm. Users stitched Crockett's words into reaction videos. Teens quoted her in TikTok dances. Activists reshared the clip with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. By evening, opening monologues featured punchlines about McCarthy's face, replayed over laugh tracks, while Jasmine's poise became the setup to applause lines. Journalists scrambled to keep up. Political commentators, some hostile to Crockett, admitted on live broadcasts that she had delivered the night's defining moment. Headlines screamed, "Crockett unloads calm facts, humble McCarthy in stunning exchange. The clip Washington can't stop watching." McCarthy mocked. Crockett crowned. Cable networks ran the footage on a loop, analyzing her tone, her timing, her precision. Analysts pointed out that while McCarthy swung wildly with insults, Crockett never lost composure. A textbook demonstration of how dignity dismantles bluster. The effect inside Washington was immediate. Rivals who once dismissed her as a freshman troublemaker now whispered that she might be the new face of fearless opposition. Allies rallied, sharing the video with pride, calling her the example of what the next generation of leadership should look like. Even some Republicans admitted privately that McCarthy had walked into a trap of his own arrogance. Meanwhile, McCarthy faced a storm of ridicule. Conservative media tried to spin it, insisting context was missing. But the clip was too clean, too undeniable. No amount of commentary could erase the sight of him shrinking, while Crockett calmly unveiled the record. Memes mocked his silence, nicknaming him Mr. Receipts and Kevin Crickets. His swagger, once his armor, became the punchline. On campuses, students shared the clip as proof that politics could still deliver moments of courage. At kitchen tables, families replayed it, pointing out the difference between shouting and standing firm. Immigrants and marginalized communities flooded Jasmine's inbox with messages of pride. "You spoke for us. Thank you for standing tall when they tried to cut you down." It wasn't just a viral moment. It was validation. Late-night talk shows replayed the document drop with dramatic music, cutting away to McCarthy's faltering face as the audience roared. Editorial cartoons sketched Jasmine as David with a sling, McCarthy as Goliath tumbling backward. Podcasts across the spectrum dissected it, praising her precision as the kind of authenticity missing from Washington. The ripple effect was cultural as much as political. A hashtag became a rallying cry. A clip turned into a symbol. Crockett wasn't just trending. She was transforming into a figure people wanted to believe in. Her calm had become the antidote to a politics addicted to noise. McCarthy, by contrast, found himself cornered. Reporters hounded him in hallways, asking for a response he couldn't frame. Every attempt at deflection only revived the clip. Every denial triggered another round of shares. The humiliation stuck, and in the echo of it all, one truth crystallized: this wasn't just about a single debate. It was about who would define the future. The chamber had witnessed it. The nation had amplified it. And as the clip spread into classrooms, homes, workplaces, and churches, it became something larger than a political skirmish. It became a story. And like all powerful stories, it carried a weight beyond headlines. But the true impact wasn't just political, it was personal, generational, and moral. When the chamber finally quieted, when the echo of the clash had faded into the marble walls, Jasmine Crockett did something rare in politics. She refused to make the moment just about herself. She could have basked in the applause, claimed the headlines, worn the victory as a badge of personal triumph. But instead, she straightened the papers in front of her and lifted her voice above the lingering murmurs. Calm, measured, unwavering. "This isn't about me," she said, "and it's not even about one man's insults. This is about something bigger, something we owe to every American who believes in truth." The words fell heavy, not like a blow, but like a stone sinking into water. Rings of meaning spread outward, touching everyone in the room and far beyond it. She reframed what had just happened as more than a clash between two politicians. It was dignity standing face to face with arrogance. It was honesty confronting performance. It was courage against the machinery of contempt, and that's why it struck so deeply. Because the people watching weren't just seeing a member of Congress defend herself. They were seeing their own struggles reflected. The student mocked for speaking up. The worker dismissed in a meeting. The immigrant talked over and underestimated. Every person who had ever been told they were too loud, too passionate, too different. Crockett's calm dismantling of McCarthy wasn't only a rebuttal, it was a promise. A promise that truth, spoken clearly and without fear, could still cut through noise. She leaned into that promise. "Justice," she said, "isn't about titles. It isn't about who's been here longest or who thinks they own the room. Justice is about courage. It's about standing up when it's easier to stay quiet. It's about holding on to dignity when others try to take it away." Those words were replayed almost as often as the document drop itself, because they weren't political talking points. They were a moral reflection that belonged to everyone listening. And for the audience, progressive, immigrant, working-class dreamers, it was validation. Validation that resilience was not weakness, that composure in the face of mockery was not silence but strength, that democracy at its core was not about who shouted loudest, but about who stood firm for truth. In those moments, Crockett's voice carried the cadence of something larger than politics. It was a reminder of what America claimed to be and what it still struggled to live up to. She embodied the idea that democracy is not fragile when guarded by courage, that integrity is not rare when chosen deliberately, and that resilience is not optional, it is survival. The lesson reached beyond the chamber, beyond the trending hashtags, beyond the news cycle. It carried into living rooms and classrooms and offices. You don't have to match arrogance with arrogance. You don't have to trade insult for insult. Sometimes the most powerful strike is calm truth, laid bare, impossible to deny. Crockett framed it in universal terms. "This isn't just my story," she said quietly. "It's America's story. The story of people who came here with nothing and built everything. The story of workers who kept going even when doors were slammed in their faces. The story of every generation that chose dignity over despair." And in that moment, she wasn't just a congresswoman sparring with a rival. She was a vessel of memory, channeling a long tradition of justice seekers, freedom fighters, and ordinary citizens who refused to bow. It was inspirational, but not lofty. Simple words rooted in lived truth, and that's why they resonated, because they reminded the audience not just of what happened in the chamber, but of what could still happen in their own lives. As the session closed, as the cameras dimmed and the day's business ended, one feeling lingered: uplift. The sense that, even in the chaos of politics, there are moments where clarity cuts through, moments where values stand taller than arrogance. And for Jasmine Crockett, that was the true victory. She hadn't just defeated McCarthy. She had defended the idea that integrity matters, that courage matters, that truth matters. And in doing so, she gave America something far more lasting than a viral clip. She gave it a reminder of itself. Kevin McCarthy attacked. Jasmine Crockett answered. And with one document, she ended the charade. The moment was bigger than politics. It was a reminder that arrogance can roar, but dignity endures. This is why the clip shook Washington. It wasn't just about a debate in a chamber. It was about a clash of values. On one side, mockery, dismissal, the tired routine of power trying to silence truth. On the other, calm resolve, unshaken courage, the strength to let facts speak louder than noise. And in that room, America saw the contrast clearly. One man rattled, exposed. One woman steady, victorious. The story didn't need spin because the truth played out in real time for the world to see. That is why this moment matters, not just for today, But for every day we ask ourselves what kind of country we want to be. A country where arrogance controls the narrative? Or a country where integrity cuts through lies? The choice is always ours. So let this story be more than a headline. Let it be a spark. Share it, talk about it, carry it into your own battles, at work, at school, in your community. Because dignity isn't only Crockett's weapon, it's yours too. And if you believe dignity will always outshine arrogance, stand with us, subscribe, share this story. Be part of the movement, because this fight doesn't end in that chamber. It begins with all of us.